G'day guys, it's Brock Layden here. Wanted to bring something short and snappy this morning just because I was just thinking about it this morning. I read a quote and it made me, think about this and want to discuss this topic. Um, have you ever looked around people in your team and just wondered like how are they getting so much done? They seem to be wearing so many different hats, but they're keeping on top of it all, whereas you're struggling to keep up with just like one role that you're trying to fill. Um, or perhaps you're a grad and you've watched some of my other videos where one of the things that I pretty consistently talk about is the value of taking on more responsibility. And you might be thinking, but Brock, I'm already working full time with the current responsibilities. How can I take on more? And I think part of the answer is this curve, this graph. Now, what it essentially describes is how whenever you take on any responsibility, take on any new task, at the start, it takes a lot of effort, right? And this kind of upwards part of the curve here, I call taking responsibility, right? This is when you're taking on something new and it takes a lot more time, it takes a lot more effort because you're doing it for the first time, you're trying to figure out how it works, you're trying to wrap your head around everything. So it takes a lot more time. Then, as time goes on, the task or the responsibility becomes easier and you start to become familiar with it. You figure out how it works. And I call this part taming the responsibility or the task. So at the start where we're taking responsibility, it's high effort up front. And then over time, you gradually tame it. And I think that happens naturally anyway, because as you become familiar with something, you just naturally get better at it, whether you're trying or not. But I think if you can do it consciously as well, you can consciously try and tame tasks and responsibilities. And the reason why I think this curve is important is because I think it explains how you can, how people around you may be doing more than what you think is possible for yourself, as well as how you can still take on more responsibility, even if right now you feel that you are fully, utilized, you can't take on any more. So if you feel like you can't take on any more, you've got your plate full, chances are you're at this part of the curve where you're taking on responsibilities, you're trying to figure out how things are being done, right? You're taking on a new role or whatever it might be. But if you can put your time and energy into figuring out how to tame the current responsibilities that you have so that they become lower effort, then that enables you to, imagine this graph kept expanding. You could then start up another curve here where you take on a new responsibility and then tame that one as well. And then you can have a third one that tames, because by the time you start, the second responsibility, let's say, this first one has already been tamed. The effort is down here. So now you can take on another one, and then you can take on another one. And without realizing it, that's kind of what I've done throughout like the early parts of my career, where I'd take on a responsibility. It'd be high effort at the start, then I'd figure out how to reduce the effort associated with it, and only then would I then take on another responsibility. Whereas if I'd taken them both on at the same time, I probably would have crumbled under it. And I wasn't doing it consciously, I just got lucky. And I think things probably just came to me in the right time where, I wasn't just saying yes to them where I was going to crumble. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how can I take on more responsibility? Figure out how you can tame the responsibility that you already have. I'll give you a practical example. On the first project that I was working on as a grad, I was given, a responsibility, a very basic responsibility, which was basically glorified data processing, like data input, where, a bunch of inputs would come my way. I'd have to do some work and manipulation to it and then spit out a result at the other side. I'm just being vague because I don't want to go into what the, actual work on the project was, obviously. Now, the way that I tamed that responsibility, because originally at the start when I picked that up, it was high effort. I was trying to figure out, why am I doing this? What needs to go where? How does this all work? Who do I need to talk to? Yada, yada, yada. Then I naturally was able to tame that responsibility because I just became more proficient at it, right? As happens with anything when you do it, over and over and over. But then I also did some things to consciously tame that responsibility. So one thing that I did was I standardized the process. So at the start, there's kind of like a lot of different inputs coming at me from a data perspective, and they wouldn't always come with the same information. I have to go back and ask people some questions and that sort of thing. So I just standardized the data that was coming to me via a simple form, right? So there's a form, that had, mandatory fields and that sort of thing, so that at least it was all coming to me through the same entry point, and it was all coming to me consistently. So I saved time in terms of having to look at things which came in different formats and having to chase people up because, they didn't provide me something that I needed. So I standardized that. I also then figured out just my own way of working. How can I do the work better? Which I guess is part of that just natural, becoming more proficient at something. So I figured out that it was much more efficient and effective for me, rather than actioning each one of these inputs as soon as it came. I'd wait for a few to come and then batch them and do them all together at once. And so the combination of those two things, standardizing the process and figuring out just a more effective way of doing it by batching it, meant that I was doing the same responsibility. I had the same task, the same responsibility, but it was taking me like half the time is what it was doing. And after I tamed that responsibility, made it take half the time, then I was ready to take on the next responsibility. And you can just imagine your career, if you keep doing that, right? You keep taking a responsibility, it's high effort at the start, but then you figure out how to tame it and bring it back down, then you can pick up the next one. And then you do that, you pick up the next one. And you can quickly build quite a web of different things that you're responsible for, because you've tamed them all and you've made them relatively easy, light touch. They don't take as much effort as they used to. And from outside, from afar, it looks really impressive. And people might be like, how are you're doing that, but you're also doing that, and you're also responsible for that. How are you doing that? But on the inside, it's because you staggered the start points of all of them, right? So you didn't try and start all of them at once. You did one at a time, tamed it, next one, take it, tame it, next one, take it, tame it. And you did that. And so it's all just this, it's not as hard as it looks from the outside, right? When you do it that way. I'll give you a practical example that I'm going through right now. So I've relatively recently taken on a responsibility within my team for managing recruitment. And this is something brand new to me, never done recruitment before. I've done interviews before, but never been kind of the person coordinating the recruitment process. And so I've come into it basically completely green, trying to learn, how do you do it? What's the process? Who do I need to talk to? Who needs to approve it? What do you need to provide? How do you write a job description? All those sorts of things. And it has been very high effort, and it still is. I'm definitely still at this part of the curve where it's very high effort for me at the moment. It's taking a lot of time. But I know, and realistically, it would be tough for me to maintain this responsibility if it stayed at this level of effort consistently. But I know it's not going to stay at that level of effort consistently, because I'm naturally going to I'm going to learn more, and it's going to be easier just because I understand the whole process better, and it'll lead to this taming of the curve. But then what I'm also going to do consciously, some of the last example that I gave, is I'm going to, once we've hired a few roles and that sort of thing, I'm going to go look back on the process, kind of do a retrospective and figure out what worked in the process, what didn't work, how can I just make the process more efficient so that next time we get the same result or a better result and it takes me less time. And I know that with enough iterations of that, I'll be able to take this recruiting responsibility, which right now is very high effort and taking hours every day. I'll be able to bring it down to something which maybe just takes an hour a week on a Monday morning or something like that. And it'll be another role that I can kind of hang my hat on and say, yeah, I'm doing that. It's more responsibility. And then I'll be able to take on whatever the next responsibility is. But the key is, if I try and take on something else right now, I'm going to probably struggle, because I've got this recruiting responsibility, which is taking a lot of my time. I've got client responsibilities. I've got other things internally that I'm doing as well. And most of those are tamed in terms of, I understand what I'm doing to reduce the effort involved in those things while still getting a good result. But this recruiting one, I'm not there yet. So I just got to ride this wave for now. I'm probably at the peak now, I think. I've had this ramp up, I'm at the peak. And now I'm going to figure out how to reduce it so that, again, I can hold that role, do other things, and pick up new roles as well. So I thought it was, like I said, I just read a quote. In fact, I'll just read it now. It's from the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And the author wrote, "As you become skilled in a task, its demand for energy diminishes. Studies of the brain have shown that the pattern of activity associated with an action changes as skill increases, with fewer brain regions involved." So as you do stuff, it gets easier. So shorter video today, just a little tidbit. hope it gives you something useful. Let me know what you think in the comments. But I'll leave it there, guys. Cheers.